Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight, we'll take a step back into one of the most fascinating moments in our planet's history. It was a time long before us, long before cities, long before our kind even.
You've probably heard the word many times, usually linked to movies full of towering dinosaurs, giant teeth, and thundering footsteps.
But the truth is much richer, more detailed, and a lot stranger than what pop culture usually shows us.
And together, we'll move slowly into that world, not rushing, not forcing anything.
The way landscapes unfold when you look out a train window and let the scenery drift by. Before we begin properly, let me turn toward you for a moment. These journeys are also about where you are right now. So tell me in your own quiet mind, what time is it where you're listening? Is it late with lights dimmed, the air a little cooler? Maybe your body already ready to settle into rest. Or is it earlier in the day when you've carved out this pause for yourself?
Are you at home, maybe in bed, or are you somewhere else entirely, using headphones to carry you into another world?
However you've arrived here, it's just the right time. You've already made space for this moment, and that's all it takes.
If you find this kind of wandering exploration soothing, I'd be grateful if you tapped the like button, or maybe subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach others who might also be looking for a soft landing at the end of a long day. It keeps the path open for anyone else who wants to learn about the world, while letting their shoulders drop and their thoughts loosen. So now, let's begin to ease into the Jurassic. This was not just a backdrop for giant reptiles. It was a real place in time, stretching from about 201 million years ago to about 145 million years ago. Think about how much space that covers. All of human history fits into a tiny fragment of that span. Civilizations rising and falling, technologies invented and replaced, entire cultures leaving their mark and then vanishing. All of it would look like a flicker compared to the length of the Jurassic. Yet, the Earth would not have felt completely alien to you. The sun rose in the morning and set in the evening. The moon tugged at the oceans with tides that would have felt familiar, though a bit stronger because the moon sat closer than it does now. Clouds formed.
You would recognize much, even as you notice differences. The Jurassic was the middle act of the Mesozoic era, the so-called Age of Dinosaurs.
But it's important to remember that it wasn't just about dinosaurs. That phrase, while convenient, hides how much else was happening.
Plants were spreading and evolving. Oceans were alive with shapes that don't exist anymore. Continents were breaking apart slowly but surely, setting up the arrangement of land and sea that would eventually become the world you know.
Volcanoes shaped mountains. Storms swept across wide-open coasts. And life had to match that restlessness by adapting, changing, and growing. Imagine walking into that world.
The first thing you'd notice is the warmth. This was a greenhouse Earth, warmer than today. There were no polar ice caps. The air held more moisture, making it heavier, more humid. You'd breathe it in and feel the difference.
Around you would be forests, not of familiar oaks or maples, but of conifers, cycads, and ferns.
Tall trees reached up with thick trunks, their needles forming green canopies. Beneath them, cycads stood in clusters. Ferns spread across the ground in wide mats, covering open spaces the way grasses cover fields today. But grasses didn't exist yet. The landscapes were green, but not in the same way your eyes are used to seeing. As you looked closer, movement would reveal itself. It is not the wind that moves this ancient branch, but the sheer power of the Apatosaurus, a creature truly wondrous in scale. Dinosaurs were here, yes, but not all of them were massive. Some were small, quick, and nimble, darting between plants. And it wasn't just dinosaurs. Insects buzzed and crawled, some familiar in form, some strange. Early mammals, tiny and often hidden, crept through the undergrowth.
Birds, or at least the first versions of them, flapped in the trees.
Oceans not far away rippled with creatures that resembled reptiles but lived like fish. Plesiosaurs.
It was a world of constant motion, filled with both giants and things so small you'd overlook them if you weren't paying attention. And that's the part that often gets lost. We think of the Jurassic as a stage play, a parade of massive dinosaurs stomping across the floor.
But it wasn't staged. It was alive. It was ecosystems that worked, with predators and prey, with cycles of growth and decay, with daily struggles to eat, to reproduce, to survive storms and droughts and volcanic eruptions. Every creature, large or small, was part of something bigger. And none of them thought of themselves as extraordinary. To them, life was just life. They didn't know they'd one day be turned into fossils, studied by strange descendants of mammals.
They simply lived the way creatures do now. It's strange, but grounding to think of that.
The dinosaurs you imagine never knew they were dinosaurs. They were just animals. They woke, they ate, they searched, they fought, they slept.
Which means that while we can marvel at their size, we can also...
That's what makes the Jurassic not just a gallery of fossils, but a living story. The Earth itself was constantly shaping that story.
The supercontinent Pangaea had begun to break apart. That process started in the Triassic, but by the Jurassic, it was well underway. Slits. Imagine continents slowly drifting, oceans widening, coastlines stretching and shifting. What looked...
Back then, what is now the Atlantic Ocean was opening. Land masses were pulling apart.
Life had to spread into them, filling niches as quickly as they appeared. Don't picture them as static painting.
The calls of diverse prehistoric animals echoed through dense prehistoric forests. Wind moved through the trees. Thunderstorms rolled across open expanses heavy with rain.
And here's the part that makes it almost comforting. As much as things have changed, the rhythms weren't unfamiliar. Sunlight warmed the day. Shadows lengthened toward evening. Stars filled the sky at night. We're used to seeing Earth as a map, with continents shaped like puzzle pieces that all fit neatly into familiar outlines.
But the Jurassic Earth was not arranged the way we know it now. The land was still in the process of pulling itself apart.
Picture it stretched across much of the globe. A huge expanse of connected land surrounded by a single enormous ocean.
By the early Jurassic, cracks had already begun to open slowly, separating what would one day become the continents we know today.
The Atlantic Ocean was just starting, more like a chain of newborn seas nudging their way between drifting pieces of crust.
If you could hover above the planet in that age, the shapes would look familiar in some ways, but very different in others. To the south, South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia were still linked together in a block of land called Gondwana. The evidence was already written in the landscapes. Long cracks called rift valleys were opening, pouring out basalt.
For life on the ground, those changes didn't look like a world map shifting. They looked like new coastline. To a sauropod moving across a forest, the drift of continents was invisible.
The climate during this time was different. Because the continents were clustered together, the interiors often experienced extremes.
The poles, unlike today, weren't capped with thick sheets of ice. Instead, they were milder, supporting vegetation. Imagine a world where forests stretched almost everywhere, reaching into high latitudes, unbroken by polar.
Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were higher, which helped trap more heat and kept the planet in a greenhouse state. Monsoon-like systems likely brought heavy seasonal rains to some parts of the continents, but the overall picture was a warmer, wetter Earth.
Forests grew dense and tall. Conifers dominated, much like they do today in places such as the Pacific Northwest, though the species were different.
Ferns carpeted the ground in thick mats, especially in humid zones. Cycads with their thick trunks and stiff leaves were common. Horsetails grew in wet ground, their hollow stalks reaching impressive heights compared to the small versions you might see today.
Without grasses, the landscapes looked different. No open meadows, no wide grass plains.
Rivers and lakes dotted those landscapes. Lakes could be large, occupying rift valleys, their waters reflecting the forests around them. Oceans were beginning to host their own drama. The single great ocean, Panthalassa, still stretched across much of the globe.
But new seaways were appearing as Pangaea split. The Tethys Ocean was an especially important body of water.
Coral reefs expanded within it, building habitats for fish and invertebrates. Marine reptiles prowled those waters, hunting with speed and power.
The air itself was also different. Oxygen levels are thought to have been somewhat higher than today, though estimates vary.
And it was filled with sound. Insects hummed. Amphibians croaked in wetlands.
The sky was not silent either. Pterosaurs, flying reptiles, soared overhead. Their cries...
At night, the stars appeared just as they do now. The moon was closer, so it looked larger, and its pull on the tides was stronger. Nights along coastlines would have carried the rhythm of waves crashing under that bright lunar glow.
It's easy to think of this scene as alien, but the more you let it settle in, the more it becomes familiar.
Those are patterns that still exist today. The species were different, the plants arranged differently, the continents placed in other configurations. But the principles of life remain the same. That's what makes picturing the Jurassic Earth possible. You just have to shift the details. The sauropods that ate from treetops pruned forests in ways that opened space for other plants. Predators kept populations in balance.
When you look at a fossil in a museum, you're seeing one piece of that network, frozen in stone.
The Earth 200 million years ago was not just the setting of the Jurassic. It was the force that shaped it.
The oceans nurtured marine reptiles and fish. The air carried sound and flight.
And as the land kept moving, as seas kept widening, as volcanoes poured out their molten rock, life moved with it.
Animals and plants never stopped adjusting, never stopped evolving. The Jurassic world was not frozen.
The entire world was warmer than the one you know today, operating under greenhouse conditions.
That meant higher average global temperatures, no permanent ice caps at the poles, and an atmosphere with more carbon dioxide.
Imagine Antarctica, but instead of being covered in thick layers of ice, it hosted forests of conifers and ferns.
This greenhouse climate also meant sea levels were higher. With no vast ice caps,
These shallow seas were full of nutrients, feeding coral reefs, shellfish, fish, and marine reptiles.
With warmer oceans evaporating more water, the atmosphere carried high amounts of moisture. That meant heavy rains in many regions.
Humidity was another defining characteristic. If you walked through a Jurassic forest, the air would feel heavy compared to what you're used to. This atmosphere created environments that could sustain enormous animals. The climate supported endless supplies of plant matter. The higher oxygen levels also played a role. That made breathing efficient for large creatures and supported the growth of active animals.
The skies themselves would have carried evidence of this climate. Clouds formed frequently, building into thick ocean.
The greenhouse conditions of the Jurassic also helped stabilize ecosystems. With fewer sharp trends between seasons, warm, wet conditions accelerated the weathering of rocks, feeding minerals into rivers and seas, which helped support marine ecosystems. Volcanoes, frequent along rift zones, also released gases and ash. Eruptions contributed to the greenhouse system. The greenhouse atmosphere had direct effects on plants. Photosynthesis was highly efficient with elevated carbon dioxide levels. That abundance translated into food for herbivores, which in turn supported predators, linking the atmosphere to the entire ecosystem. Migration patterns were different. Animals could spread across wider ranges without being limited by cold zones. Forests reached into high latitudes. The lack of permanent polar ice also meant ocean currents behaved differently, helping to maintain the even distribution of heat.
When you imagine standing in that world,
Picture the heat on your skin, the air moist.
The sky builds with clouds, releasing sudden rain that soaks the ground, feeding the ferns and cycads. Picture nights that are cooler but not cold. Stars overhead bright, the moon larger, tides stronger.
The greenhouse climate of the Jurassic wasn't just background scenery. It was the engine that powered the age. One of the biggest differences from today was the way the continents were arranged, as part of a supercontinent called Pangaea.
On one side of it lay a single enormous ocean, Panthalassa. On the other, the
Atlantic Ocean, which today separates continents, had its origins in this Jurassic rifting, starting as a series of valleys.
If you had been standing there, you wouldn't have seen continents racing. You would have seen long valleys with cliffs and volcanic activity.
The separation created barriers.
Isolation is one of the drivers of evolution. Over time, separated groups become distinct species, developing unique ecosystems.
As plates pulled apart, magma rose, producing lava flows that stretched for hundreds of kilometers.
The formation of rift valleys left behind geological records, many later filled with lakes, and the sediments preserved fossils. To the north was Laurasia, which included North America, Europe, and Asia. To the south was Gondwana.
The Tethys Ocean deserves special attention. It was warm, shallow, and biologically rich.
As continents moved, climates shifted. As climates shifted, ecosystems changed.
The continents would continue to move throughout the Cretaceous and beyond, eventually reaching the arrangement we see today. And all the while, life carried on. Dinosaurs grazed in forests. Predators stalked their prey.
The Jurassic was the beginning of new oceans taking shape, changing the face of the planet.
For millions of years, Earth had been dominated by one massive ocean, Panthalassa. But once the great landmass began to fragment, water rushed into the gaps, forming new seas and reshaping old ones.
The Tethys Ocean, wedged between the breaking continents, served as a nursery for countless species.
Ammonites with their coiled shells floated through the water in huge numbers, now serving as key markers for dating Jurassic rocks.
The rise of new seaways also meant the circulation of water around the planet shifted, spreading heat more evenly across the globe.
Coastlines transformed dramatically. As rifts widened, long stretches of new shoreline appeared, providing habitats that didn't exist before.
The shallow seas that formed along continental edges were particularly important, as sunlight could penetrate their.
Oceans also served as barriers and pathways. For land animals, new seas created divisions. For marine animals, the seas were highways.
Storms were part of this oceanic world too. Warm water feeds powerful weather systems, and the oceans were primed to produce them.
The chemistry of the oceans was different as well. Higher levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere affected seawater, just as they do now.
Despite fluctuations, reefs flourished, suggesting conditions were favorable for calcifying organisms to build their skeletons.
The interaction between land and sea was constant, with animals and plants on each side influencing the other.
These processes created environments where fossils could later form. That's why so many important Jurassic fossils are found in marine deposits.
If you could stand on a Jurassic coast, the view would have been striking. Marine reptiles surfaced for air, their bodies glistening.
The oceans of the Jurassic were never quiet. They were places of constant energy, shaping everything that lived on the planet.
As continents kept moving, the oceans kept adjusting. The story of the Jurassic cannot be told without them.
When you imagine walking across the land during the Jurassic, the very first thing surrounding you would be the plants.
Before you ever spotted a giant sauropod, you'd be standing in landscapes defined by towering trees, sprawling ferns, and dense thickets of cycads.
Grasses didn't exist yet. The great open meadows and savannas that feel so natural to us today were not part of the scenery.
Instead, the ground was covered with layers of ferns. They spread like living carpets, filling the understory with their wide fronds. Each frond unrolling in spirals during its early growth, before flattening into the fan-like shape we still see in modern ferns. Above them grew cycads. These plants were unlike anything most people are used to today, looking a little like palms with stout trunks.
They reproduced using cones rather than flowers because flowering plants hadn't yet evolved.
Then there were the conifers, the true giants of the forests. Some of them were immense, reaching heights of more than 100 feet. Walking into one of these forests would have been an overwhelming experience. The air under those trees would be cool.
Horsetails deserve their own mention. In the Jurassic, they could grow much taller, sometimes up to.
All these plants existed long before flowering plants. There were no colorful blossoms, no meadow. Pollination in the Jurassic was simpler. Wind carried spores from ferns and horsetails. Conifers and cycads relied on cones.
This meant the landscapes were overwhelmingly green. Seasonal changes were subtle, with most plants being evergreen.
Gangs. The abundance of plant life made it possible for massive animals like sauropods to exist.
In return, the giants shaped the forests. When a sauropod moved through a stand of trees, it pulled down branches and opened gaps in the canopy.
Fossil evidence tells us that many of these plants left behind thick accumulations of debris.
Imagine walking across different regions. In lowlands near rivers, you'd find wetlands dominated by horse.
It's also worth considering how fire interacted with these forests. Lightning strikes could ignite vegetation. Some plants, like certain conifers, were adapted to survive fire. Their thick bark protected them, and their cones could open after heat. Dinosaurs and other animals would have moved in response, fleeing the flames, then returning to graze on the tender shoots that sprang up afterward.
The presence of these forests also influenced the atmosphere itself. Plants take in carbon dioxide,
and small mammals built burrows under fern mats. Insects laid eggs inside cycad leaves. Pterosaurs perched on conifer branches. The plants were the stage, the script, and the supporting cast. Everything else, no matter how impressive, was dependent on them. Ferns dominated the ground. Instead of vast fields of grass, you would have found expanses of fern prairies rolling across floodplains.
unlike seeds, spores didn't need pollinators. A single breeze could scatter millions of them across the landscape.
This meant ferns could colonize open ground quickly, especially after disturbances like fire or floods.
The animals of the Jurassic depended on these prairies. Large herbivores grazed on them, while smaller dinosaurs.
Ferns also dominated the understory of the great forests, forming a continuous layer of greenery beneath the towering trees.
This understory created a unique world of its own. The air was cooler there, damper, with a constant smell of soil and vegetation.
Predators, like a gray wolf, hunting in the forest had to listen for rustling in the ferns to find their prey. The understory was a living maze.
The resilience of ferns came from their simple but effective reproductive strategy. By producing vast...
Imagine a herd of adult and juvenile Stegosaurus ungulatus moving across a fern prairie, their beaked mouths cropping the fronds methodically.
Predators like Allosaurs might have stalked along the edges, waiting for a moment when an individual strayed too far from the group.
In the dim green spaces of the understory, early mammals, no larger than a mouse or rat.
Many Jurassic rock formations preserve impressions of fern fronds, their shapes pressed into mud that later hardened into stone.
These plants shaped soils by trapping moisture and preventing erosion. They played the same role grasses play in many modern ecosystems.
The fern prairies and understories were not just background details. They were the canvas on which the entire ecosystem was painted. Wondrous, dynamic. When you turn your focus from the land to the waters of the Jurassic, the picture shifts dramatically.
The most iconic marine reptiles were the ichthyosaurs. Their bodies looked remarkably like dolphins, streamlined and built for speed. Fossils show that some species reached lengths of more than 15 meters. Imagine a reptile the size of a bus darting through the ocean.
Fossilized stomach contents even reveal their diets. Some contain fish bones, others the remains of squid-like creatures.
Then there were the plesiosaurs. They had broad, flat bodies powered by 4 strong flippers, which the long-necked forms could stretch their necks out into schools of fish, snapping up prey with quick bites without moving their entire bodies. Among the most powerful were the pliosaurs, a group with short necks and massive heads. They were apex predators.
Their jaws were filled with teeth as long as bananas, capable of crushing bone. They hunted anything they could catch.
The fish of the Jurassic were just as important. They filled the oceans in staggering numbers, providing the base of the food web for predators.
Sharks were present as well. They had already been around for hundreds of millions of years, and in the Jurassic, they continued to thrive. Ammonites are worth returning to. These mollusks, relatives of squid, lived inside coiled shells and floated through the water using jet propulsion. Their shells were beautifully patterned and divided internally into chambers, which they filled with gas or fluid to control buoyancy.
Coral reefs provided another key feature. They stretched across warm, shallow seas, providing structure where countless species could live. The interaction between land and sea was constant. Rivers carried nutrients from forests.
Pterosaurs, the flying reptiles of the time, soared above the waters, diving to catch fish or scavenging along coasts.
If you could dive into a Jurassic sea, the experience would overwhelm the senses.
Schools of fish would swirl around you, parting as an ichthyosaur shot past. In the distance, a plesiosaur would glide.
The oceans of the Jurassic were engines of evolution, arenas of competition, and sources of abundance.
The corals of the Jurassic were different from those today. They shared space with other reef builders, such as sponges and algae.
The reef was never quiet or still. Small, colorful clownfish darted in and out of coral branches.
One of the most striking aspects of these reefs was the density of life they supported. On the reefs also provided nurseries for young animals, safe places for early growth before moving into open waters as adults.
Predators were never far away. Ichthyosaurs patrolled the waters around reefs, darting in to grab fish that strayed too far from cover.
For paleontologists, reefs are gold mines of information. Fossil reefs preserve not. Imagine swimming through one of these Jurassic reefs. The water would be warm and clear, sunlight cutting down in shifting beams.
The reefs were also resilient. Storms battered them, yet the corals and their allies rebuilt generation after generation.
Without reefs, the biodiversity of the Jurassic seas would have been far lower. They were cradles of life.
On land, there is one image that rises above all, the sauropod. These enormous...
When an animal stretches more than 20 meters in length with a neck longer than a bus, it doesn't simply live in an environment, it transforms it.
The most familiar sauropods include Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, and Apatosaurus.
Fossils show us that these giants traveled in groups. A single sauropod, no matter how large, was still
Their footprints, preserved in trackways across ancient floodplains, reveal parallel lines that suggest coordinated movement.
Feeding was at the center of everything they did. Some, like Brachiosaurus, carried their necks high, browsing at levels few others could touch.
Others, like Diplodocus, had necks that extended horizontally, sweeping through ferns and low vegetation in wide arcs.
They didn't chew their food. Most of the breakdown happened inside their massive guts, possibly with the help of swallowed stones called gastroliths. Their size also helped them regulate body temperature. Large animals lose heat more slowly, which meant they could maintain stable internal temperatures. Sauropods developed unique bone structures to be both strong and light. Their vertebrae were filled with air sacs.
The growth of these animals was astonishing. They hatched from eggs no larger than a football and had to grow rapidly.
Their impact on their environment was profound. Moving through forests, they knocked down trees, opened gaps. Some species had tails that may have acted like whips, capable of creating cracks loud enough to startle predators or communicate.
Fossil sites from the Jurassic often contain the remains of multiple sauropods together, suggesting they lived and died in groups.
The sheer presence of sauropods must have been awe-inspiring. To smaller animals, they would have seemed like moving hills. Their dominance didn't mean exclusion. Stegosaurs, ornithopods, and other plant-eating dinosaurs shared the land with them.
Even today, when we see their skeletons in museums, the scale is hard to grasp. They challenge our sense of what's possible.
They weren't accidents of evolution. They were the natural outcome of an environment that allowed plants to grow endlessly and animals to expand.
If the sauropods were rulers through size, the predators of the Jurassic were the forces that tested them. Among them, the Allosaurs stood out.
Fossils of Allosaurus gimadzini have been found in great numbers, suggesting they were common and successful apex predators.
Adults reached lengths of around 9 to 12 meters, with powerful jaws lined with serrated teeth designed for slicing rather than crushing.
What made Allosaurs effective was their build. They had strong hind limbs for running and maneuvering, balanced by long tails.
Their arms, though smaller than their legs, were not useless. Each hand carried 3 sharp claws which could grip and slash.
Evidence from fossil injuries suggests that Allosaurs were capable of tackling large prey, including sauropods.
Trackways and bone beds hint at the possibility of group behavior, perhaps tolerating each other around kills, much like modern crocodiles. The interactions between predator and prey were constant. An Allosaur circling a herd of stegosaurs had to calculate the risk carefully.
Attacking a healthy adult stegosaur could mean being impaled. The safer option was to target juveniles or injured individuals.
Allosaurs were also opportunists. Fossil evidence shows they fed on carcasses as well as live prey. Scavenging didn't make them less effective hunters.
Other predators filled different niches. Smaller theropods hunted the understory, preying on mammals, lizards, and young dinosaurs.
Pathologies on predator bones suggest that hunting was dangerous. Broken bones that healed suggest they survived significant injuries.
One of the keys to their success was adaptability. They weren't locked into one prey type or one environment, allowing them to spread widely.
The presence of these predators influenced every aspect of herbivore behavior. Herding was a direct response to predators. Don't picture a peaceful parade of giants. Picture a constant balance where the shadow of a predator could fall at any time. These predators were not villains in the story. They were essential players, maintaining the balance of ecosystems.
Wondrous, informative.
When you picture the skies of the Jurassic, you might imagine them ruled entirely by...
This was the dawn of birds. The earliest birds did not look like the sparrows, crows, or hawks you know today.
They were closer to their dinosaur ancestors than to anything modern, and in many ways, they straddled the line between two worlds. Archaeopteryx, discovered in the 19th century in the limestone quarries of Germany, remains the most famous of these early birds.
Fossils of this transitional creature, specifically Archaeopteryx bavarica, show blend of features. On the other hand, it had teeth in its jaws, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail, features that were unmistakably dinosaurian.
Wondrous. Conclusive. It was a mosaic, a creature caught in transition, showing how flight evolved.
Feathers themselves had been around before true birds appeared. Many small theropod dinosaurs carried simple filamentous feathers.
Over time, these feathers became more complex, forming structures that could catch air. The flight of these early birds was probably clumsy compared to modern species. Their skeletons lacked some of the refinements for efficiency.
They may have relied on gliding from tree to tree, flapping only in bursts to extend their range or avoid predators.
Feathers gave them advantages beyond flight. They provided insulation, offered opportunities for display, and even helped with camouflage.
The discovery of Archaeopteryx fossils was a turning point. It arrived just as Darwin's theory was being debated.
The environments these early birds lived in were complex. Forests of conifers and cycads provided perches.
The sky itself was not safe because pterosaurs dominated it. Early birds had to navigate a world already full of aerial competition.
The diets of these early birds were varied. Insects were likely their primary food, abundant and accessible in forests.
Fossils of Archaeopteryx show that it had claws on its wings. a feature that may have allowed it to climb trees.
The significance of these first birds lies in what they represented. They were the beginning of a lineage that
The evidence of feathers in the Jurassic has grown stronger with discoveries from China, where fossils of small theropods show feather-like coverings.
The line between small feathered dinosaurs and true birds was blurred, making it clear that the transition was gradual, not sudden. It's easy to forget that most of the animals sharing that world were not huge at all. They were small, often.
Mammals had already appeared long before the Jurassic began. Most were about the size of a mouse, rat, or shrew.
Many were nocturnal, taking advantage of the night when the great dinosaurs were less active. Their teeth were already specialized for chewing food more effectively than reptiles could. Their fur provided insulation, allowing them to survive cooler nights.
They survived by occupying niches too small for dinosaurs to notice. They hunted insects in the leaf litter.
Insects were even more widespread, shaping every ecosystem. They included beetles, flies, dragonflies, and many others. They were crucial as decomposers, predators, and prey. They broke down dead plants and animals, recycling nutrients into the soil. Imagine the air above a Jurassic wetland. Clouds of dragonflies hovered, their wings beating fast enough to produce a constant shimmer.
The abundance of insects gave smaller animals a reliable food source, one that didn't require bringing down giants.
Amphibians were also part of this world of small wonders. Frogs had already appeared, their calls echoing near ponds and rivers. Lizards, such as geckos, scurried across rocks, basking in sunlight. Early relatives of crocodiles.
The importance of these tiny travelers becomes clearer when you consider the balance of energy. They recycled.
The limestone deposits of Germany also contain insects with wings and bodies so well preserved that researchers can study their patterns.
It's easy to imagine how these small animals lived day to day. A mammal leaves its burrow at dusk.
Their survival strategies were simple but effective. Stay small, stay hidden, reproduce quickly, and take advantage of abundant food sources. Their small size and adaptability gave them the resilience to survive events that would later wipe out the giants. They just needed to outlast them.
The world of that time was also full of sound. The soundscape was as important to life as the plants and animals themselves.
Start with the forest. The wind moved through branches with a steady hiss. Insects buzzed constantly. Green tree frogs croaked near streams.
Then came the larger voices. Sauropods likely produced deep, resonant calls.
These other herbivores had their own sounds. Stegosaurs may have used deep grunts or low bellows to warn predators. Predators added their voices too. The soundscape of wetlands added its own layers. Along rivers, amphibians called, insects droned.
Night in the Jurassic had its own distinctive sound.
On open plains covered with ferns, noises traveled farther.
The structure of inner ears in dinosaurs shows sensitivity to low frequencies, suggesting that deep rumbles were part of their communication.
The daily rhythm of sound followed the rhythm of activity. Dawn, various temperate forest in.
When the calls fall silent, the forest holds its breath.
The soundscape wasn't just about noise. It was about information. Animals used it to make decisions.
The Jurassic world was not only shaped by forests and oceans. Beneath it all, the Earth itself.
Fire and stone were everywhere in this age, sometimes quiet for centuries, then suddenly roaring.
These events weren't rare accidents. They were ongoing features of a world still pulling itself apart from the supercontinent of Pangaea.
The breakup of Pangaea created enormous stresses in the Earth's crust. As the land masses split, magma rose from deep within the mantle.
That magma created volcanic chains and basalt flows that spread for hundreds of kilometers.
Lava fields buried forests, rivers, and plains, covering them in stone that would last for millions of years.
Volcanic gases poured into the atmosphere, adding to the greenhouse climate that made the Jurassic so warm.
Imagine standing near one of these rift valleys. At first, the ground might tremble slightly, shaking trees and sending animals running.
Then, a crack opens, glowing with molten rock. In hours or days, the eruption grows. Ash clouds spread upward, blocking the sun, turning day into twilight. For miles around, the world changes in an instant. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, which continued into the Jurassic, was one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. These flows altered climates globally, pumping carbon dioxide into the air and driving shifts in ecosystems.
But not all volcanic activity was so catastrophic. Many volcanoes erupted more quietly.
Plants often returned quickly after eruptions, with ferns being among the first to recolonize scorched ground.
Within decades, areas destroyed by fire could turn green again, transformed into new forests rooted in nutrient-rich volcanic soils. Earthquakes were part of this dynamic too. As tectonic plates shifted, they produced sudden jolts that cracked the land and triggered landslides. Volcanoes also influenced the atmosphere in subtle ways, producing ash and sulfur dioxide that could block sunlight temporarily. This meant that after an eruption, local or even global temperatures might drop. Plants struggled, and animals faced lean times. Marine environments were affected too. Ash falling into the sea changed water chemistry. Lava flows entering shallow seas boiled water. The sound and sight of Jurassic volcanoes must have been unforgettable. The roar of eruptions.
At night, the glow of lava could turn entire horizons red. Animals responded.
Some were caught, their remains preserved in layers of ash that hardened into stone, freezing moments of the past in incredible detail. Many volcanic regions were thriving ecosystems between eruptions. Streams ran across cooled lava. Forests grew on volcanic slopes.
Herds of diplodoctylal sauropods may have traveled across plains shaped by lava flows.
What looked like destruction has become opportunity. This was the rhythm of the Jurassic world.
The Jurassic world was a greenhouse planet. There were no polar ice caps, no frozen tundras, and no glaciers creeping across continents.
But a world without ice did not mean a world without seasons, and it did not mean a world without storms.
The absence of permanent ice meant that sea levels were higher, flooding coastlines and creating wide, shallow seas.
Seasons were still present, though they looked different. Instead of ice and snow, seasons were marked more by changes in rainfall and storms.
Monsoon-like cycles occurred, where months of heavy rain were followed by months of dryness, profoundly affecting animals.
Storms were powerful features. Warm seas fueled massive systems similar to hurricanes, but likely more frequent in some regions. For smaller animals, burrows provided protection. For larger ones, survival depended on mobility and resilience.
The interaction of storms, floods, and fires created a mosaic of habitats, each at a different stage of
Evidence of this weather is found in rock layers. Sedimentary deposits show repeated cycles of flooding. The absence of ice also influenced ocean circulation, without cold, dense water sinking at the pole.
Imagine a herd of Diplodocus sauropods. During the wet season, they grazed on lush vegetation, surrounded by green abundance.
But as the rains ended, the ground cracked, rivers shrank, and plants withered.
Amphibians bred temporary pools left by floods.
The constant warmth influenced reproduction. Dinosaurs nested in sandy banks or forest clearings, their eggs warmed by the sun. Picture standing in a Jurassic forest as a storm approaches. The air grows heavy, insects fall silent, and then rain begins, first as a patter, then as a roar, drenching everything. Thunder rolls, light.
A world without ice was not a world without challenge. It was a world where water, warmth.
The Jurassic was also a time when evolution seemed to test idea after idea, running experiments with body plans.
Sauropods stretched into the largest land animals. Stegosaurs carried bony plates and spiked tails. Ornithopods were smaller but agile. Predators too experimented with form. Allosaurs grew into apex hunters, while relatives of varying sizes filled secondary predator roles.
In their bones, we can see the beginnings of traits that would one day define birds. Lighter skeletons, flexible wrists, and feathers.
In the oceans, the evolutionary workshop was equally busy. Ichthyosaurs refined their dolphin-like bodies.
Ammonites produced endless variations of shells, coiling in tight spirals, stretching into eccentric shapes, or developing ridges and spines. Even plants were experimenting. Conifers dominated, but cycas tested different shapes and sizes. The smaller animals also reveal experiments in survival. Some early forms may have stretched skin between their limbs to glide between trees.
Some of the experiments seem strange to us now. Certain stegosaurs carried not just plates, but spikes along their shoulders.
The Jurassic deserves its reputation as one of Earth's great ages of life, not just for the abundance, but for the constant creativity at work. Survival in the Jurassic was not guaranteed for any creature, no matter its size. Every day was shaped by the push and pull between predator and prey. This balance defined the age, creating ecosystems that were both stable and dynamic, where each species depended on the presence of others. For the giant Lusotitan sauropods, survival meant feeding almost constantly. Their enormous forms
but eating that much meant they had to move across large areas, which shaped entire landscapes and also exposed them to predators.
An adult Brachiosaurus was nearly untouchable, but the young were not. Herds formed partly to protect juveniles, with adults circling around them.
Stegosaurs had a different strategy. They couldn't outgrow predators, but they could defend themselves with armor and weapons.
The spikes, known as the thagomizer, could swing with deadly force, and fossil evidence shows puncture wounds in predator bones.
Ornithopods and smaller herbivores relied more on speed and agility. With lighter forms, they could dash into cover or flee across open ground. Survival came with risks. A moment of hesitation, a stumble in the wrong terrain, or separation from the group could mean death. Predators, for their part, faced challenges just as serious. Allosaurs and their kin were apex hunters, but they couldn't simply attack anything they wanted.
Hunting required timing, strategy, and luck. Fossil evidence of injuries on predator skeletons shows that many paid the price for failed attempts.
Some predators turned to scavenging when possible. A carcass left behind by flood, disease, or another predator was a valuable resource.
Scavenging reduced risk, but came with competition. Multiple predators might converge on the same kill, leading to fights.
Insects played their part in survival too. Swarms of them consumed carrion quickly, leaving bones picked clean in days.
The seas of the Jurassic had their own version of this balance. Ichthyosaurs hunted fish and squid, using speed and vision to survive.
Plesiosaurs dominated as apex predators capable of taking almost anything. Fish darted in schools using numbers as protection.
Weather added another layer. Storms could scatter herds, flood nesting grounds, or wash carcasses downstream. Survival wasn't just predator versus prey. It was life versus the forces of Earth itself. The fossil record gives glimpses of this struggle. Trackways show predator and prey side by side, frozen in time as they moved across mud. Bone beds reveal herds that perished together, perhaps caught in floods. Skeletons with healed wounds show survivors who endured attacks.
Social behavior was shaped by this balance. A herd that moved together could overwhelm a predator's strategy.
If you imagine yourself in that world, you'd see survival everywhere. A mammal scurrying from its burrow, whiskers twitching. The balance was never perfect, but it was persistent. It kept ecosystems functioning, allowing the...
When we think about the Jurassic, almost everything we know comes from the traces left in stone. Fossils are not just bones displayed in museums. The most recognizable fossils are the bones of dinosaurs. Sauropod skeletons stretch across museum halls. By studying the joints, paleontologists can reconstruct walking speeds, feeding behaviors, and potential range of motion.
But fossils go far beyond bones. Trackways, the preserved footprints of dinosaurs, are equally valuable.
They reveal not just that dinosaurs were there, but how they moved. Differences in stride length show adults and juveniles side by side. Fossilized nests and eggs are another window. Entire clutches have been found, sometimes with embryos inside.
Plants left their marks too. Impressions of ferns, cycads, and conifers are common, their fronds and leaves pressed into mud and silt.
Insects, though small, appear in some fossil deposits with remarkable clarity. Beetles,
Marine fossils are equally rich. Ammonites are among the most abundant, their coiled shells found in deposits worldwide.
one famous ichthyosaur fossil shows a mother giving birth with a baby halfway emerged, proving they gave live birth.
Coprolites, or fossilized droppings, may not be glamorous, but they are just as important. They reveal what animals ate.
Volcanic ash layers sometimes preserve fossils in exquisite detail, sealing them off from decay and freezing a moment in time.
Fossils also tell us about injuries, diseases, and survival. Bones with healed fractures show that animals could survive serious injuries.
The rarity of fossilization means that each discovery is precious, representing a small chance that life left behind a permanent record.
Despite this rarity, fossils of the Jurassic are found on every continent, from the Morrison Formation in North America to the quarries of Europe.
These fossils are connections to a world that no human ever saw, but that shaped the course of life we inherited.
Every bone, track, leaf impression, and shell fragment is a piece of evidence speaks across.
You've now walked through forests of conifers taller than buildings, stood among prairies of ferns stretching toward the horizon,
Dived into oceans where ichthyosaurs darted, and lifted your eyes to skies where the first birds tested uncertain wings.
As you drift back toward your own time, the distance between then and now feels both immense and surprisingly small.
Crocodiles basking in rivers carry body plans already well established during the Jurassic. Insects that buzz in
The Jurassic is not gone. It is folded into the present. Survival then, just as now, was about balance. Looking at the world now, the same pattern continues. Ecosystems still depend on that balance. The players are different, but the rules are the same.
Fossils are the voices that speak across the gulf of time, a reminder of how connected we are to that distant world.
Each fossil also reminds us that extinction is part of that story. Many of the animals you've met no longer walk the earth. The Jurassic also teaches that resilience is built into the system. After eruptions covered valleys in ash, ferns returned first. As you settle back from that journey, picture the rhythm of a single Jurassic day. Morning light, insects buzzing, herds moving to feed.
Evening brings cooling air, frogs and insects rising into choruses.
The closing reflection is not that it was alien, but that it was real, physical, and full of life, ruled by the same forces that shape.
The earth you walk on is the earth they walked on. The skies you see are the skies they tested. The Jurassic is still here, written into stone, carried into the present by living